I do veer towards the very practical explanation, and that is that it was a sort of knitting device.
12 sides, 20 strange edges. A hollow center. This mysterious bronze object is the Roman Dodecahedron. And for nearly 2,000 years, it has puzzled archaeologists and historians over what it really was and what it was used for. But in the summer of 2023, archaeologists in Norton Disney, England, uncovered a dodecahedron completely different from the examples found before it. And when researchers examined it under an advanced microscope, they found traces of aromatic substances, burned material, and something far more disturbing, possible remains of cremated human bone. So what did all those chilling clues point toward about the true purpose of the dodecahedron? Could this object really have been part of a ritual involving the dead? And if so, why did the Romans leave almost no explanation of it in their records? Let's dive in. The discovery that challenged everything. In 2023, at Norton Disney, Lincolnshire, England, a small team of archaeologists was investigating the remains of a Roman period settlement. The excavation was being carried out by the Norton Disney History and Archaeology Group, and their goal was simple: to uncover more about the people who had lived here nearly 2,000 years ago. But during the final days of the excavation, the team reached Trench 4, the deepest section of the site. And there, they found something unusual. At first, it was simply a piece of bronze buried in the clay. But as the soil was cleared away, its shape became obvious. It was hollow, roughly 8 centimeters across, with 12 pentagonal faces, a circular opening in each face, and small spherical knobs at its corners. The archaeologists had already seen such objects in museums, so they immediately identified it as an ancient Roman dodecahedron. But what they didn't know yet was that this specific specimen would soon change everything archaeologists thought they knew about the Roman dodecahedron. Because when the team began studying it with modern archaeological methods, including detailed 3D scanning and X-ray fluorescence analysis, the object started giving up clues that previous discoveries simply couldn't provide. And the first clue wasn't hidden inside the object at all. It was the condition it was found in. The dodecahedron was remarkably intact. Its 20 small knobs were still in place. The bronze showed no major cracks, impact damage, or obvious signs of being broken apart. Even the delicate edges around its openings had survived almost perfectly. For something nearly 2,000 years old, that was unusual, but its condition was only the beginning. After carefully examining the object and the soil layers around it, archaeologists were able to reconstruct how it had ended up there. And their conclusion was striking. Someone had deliberately buried the dodecahedron during the late Roman period, around the 4th century. And once it went into the ground, it appears to have remained there, largely untouched, until the excavation team uncovered it in 2023. Now, that might sound like a simple preservation story, but it became a much bigger problem when archaeologists considered what they were looking at. Because this wasn't a piece of ordinary scrap metal. In ancient Rome, bronze was a valuable material. It was made by mixing copper and tin, two metals that were expensive and often had to be brought from distant regions. Producing bronze also required furnaces hot enough to melt the metals and skilled craftsmen who knew how to cast them into finished objects. Once made, it was used for coins, tools, weapons, fittings, statues, and everyday objects. Now, here is something that didn't make sense. Because once most bronze objects were damaged or no longer useful, their metal could be recovered and melted down to make new tools, weapons, or other objects. Yet here, someone had spent the time, materials, and skill needed to create this expensive piece of bronze. And then, after using it, he deliberately buried it. That clearly suggested that whatever this object was, it had mattered much more to its owner than the value of the bronze itself. And that raised the biggest question of all. If this strange object was valuable enough to preserve, why did nobody leave behind a single clear explanation of what it was for? To find out, archaeologists had to start with the oldest record they had, the unexplained object. 1739. That was the year when the first recorded dodecahedron was brought to the attention of the scholarly world after it was found at Aston in Hertfordshire, England. The object was presented by antiquarian Brian Fairfax to the Society of Antiquaries in London. And Fairfax had to answer the same question that would confuse archaeologists for centuries. What was this thing? At first, the answer seemed fairly simple. Fairfax suggested that it could be some kind of Roman military object, possibly a piece of ordnance or a weapon head. At the time, that was a reasonable guess. The object was made of bronze. It was clearly manufactured, and its strange geometry looked too deliberate to be meaningless. But there was a problem. The bronze was too thin and intricate for something meant to survive the violence of a battlefield. One hard impact could have bent or damaged its carefully cast openings and knobs, yet the object showed none of the wear you would expect from a weapon. So that first explanation was quickly abandoned, and then something even stranger happened. Over the following decades, more of these objects began turning up. As archaeologists and antiquarians compared them, they realized this wasn't one bizarre object made by one unknown craftsman. There were dozens, then more than 100. Today, more than 130 Roman dodecahedrons have been recorded. And although they are not identical, they share the same basic design: a hollow 12-sided body, openings of different sizes, and small knobs around the corners. That was enough to show that somebody had repeatedly chosen to make this unusual object. But why? That question became even harder because we're talking about one of the most extensively documented civilizations of the ancient world. The Romans left behind an enormous amount of information about their society. They wrote about military equipment, tools, buildings, trade, religion, farming, clothing, and everyday life. They even left detailed images of ordinary objects in mosaics, sculptures, and other artwork. Yet this strange bronze object was almost completely absent from those records. There was no clear Roman name for it, no surviving instruction manual, no ancient drawing showing someone using one, no surviving text explaining its purpose. But the mystery didn't end with the written records. For most discoveries, archaeologists had another problem. The objects had been removed without the surrounding evidence that archaeologists rely on. The pottery, buildings, burials, and other clues that could have explained their purpose were already gone. So researchers were left with a frustrating mystery. They knew people had made it, they knew people had used it, but they still had no idea what the object was actually for. And then researchers started doing what you might already have in your mind. If this wasn't a weapon, then perhaps it was something completely different. So one by one, researchers put the most obvious possibilities to the test. And almost every time, the evidence pointed in the wrong direction. The failed explanations. One of the most obvious interpretations was that the dodecahedron was either a candle holder or some kind of ancient lamp. And it was easy to see why. These objects were hollow, with openings running through their sides, and they came in different sizes, usually between about 4 and 11 centimeters across. The knobs at the corners could also keep the object slightly raised above a surface, so perhaps a candle had been placed inside, with the openings allowing light to escape. But when archaeologists examined the surviving specimens, something important was missing. They found no clear evidence of repeated candle use, no obvious layers of soot, melted wax, or heavy scorching that you would expect from an object regularly used as a lamp. That made the candle theory difficult to defend. But there was an important distinction here, one that would become extremely important later. The evidence wasn't saying that nothing had ever burned inside a dodecahedron. It simply couldn't show that these objects had been used as ordinary candle holders. So researchers moved on. Another possibility was that the different-sized holes had a more technical purpose. Maybe the dodecahedron was used for surveying, helping someone estimate distances or angles. Others suggested astronomy, with the holes being used to observe the sun or track seasonal changes. But there was a serious problem. The measurements were not standardized. Different dodecahedrons had different dimensions, and the holes could vary considerably in size. A tool designed for precise calculations would normally require consistent measurements. These didn't have them. Then came a completely different idea. In 2014, independent researcher and craft historian Martin Hallett tested the theory that the objects were actually used for knitting gloves. Using a replica, he showed that the knobs and different-sized openings could be used to form individual fingers. It was an interesting demonstration, but proving that something can be used for a purpose is not the same as proving that it was designed for that purpose. Some specimens were too small for normal fingers, while others showed little evidence of the repeated wear you'd expect from a common textile tool. Every practical explanation seemed to solve one problem and create another, until researchers noticed a clue that had nothing to do with what these objects could do. It had to do with where they were found. The strange distribution. Once archaeologists began comparing where these objects had been discovered, a very clear pattern started to appear. They were not spread evenly across the Roman Empire. Instead, they were heavily concentrated in its northwestern provinces, especially Roman Britain, Gaul, Belgium, and the regions along the Rhine frontier. And that was strange, because the Roman Empire covered an enormous area. Its roads, armies, markets, and administrative systems reached from Britain to North Africa and from Spain to the Middle East. Yet, more than 130 dodecahedrons have been recorded, and they remain overwhelmingly associated with this northern part of the empire. There is another detail that makes the pattern even harder to ignore. They are not known from Rome itself. There is no large collection of them from Italy, and they do not appear as a common object across the Mediterranean heartland. So this was probably not a standard Roman object that simply happened to survive better in the north. The map was pointing somewhere else. Many of these objects appeared in regions where Roman culture had mixed with older local traditions. In places like Gaul and Britain, communities continued their own customs while living under Roman rule. Archaeologists use the term Gallo-Roman for this kind of cultural mixture. Roman influence layered over local Celtic traditions. And suddenly, the dodecahedron started looking less like an ordinary Roman invention and more like something connected to the people living on the frontier. But there was still a problem. If local communities had created these objects for some special purpose, why were so many found around areas where Roman military power was strongest? That pattern could mean several things. Perhaps Roman soldiers encountered them and carried them around. Perhaps local people made them for their own religious practices. Or perhaps both cultures interacted with the objects in ways that left almost no written record. Those possibilities made the map far more important. Because if these objects really belong to local traditions, then there could be a reason why the Romans kept their purpose deliberately out of the records. Because some practices on Rome's northern frontier were not simply unfamiliar. They were practices Rome considered dangerous. The forbidden knowledge. On the northern frontier, Rome was dealing with traditions far darker than simple superstition. Local religious specialists, including Druids, had held important roles in parts of Gaul and Britain long before Roman rule. And their practices were tied to religion, prophecy, sacrifice, and the supernatural world. Now, that's where the contradiction came. Because to the Roman authorities, magic was not always harmless superstition. Rome had actually made laws against certain forms of magic, including divination, curses, and unauthorized rituals. The Lex Cornelia de Sicarius et Veneficis, an ancient Roman law originally aimed at murder and poisoning, was later used in cases involving harmful magic and sorcery. The penalties could become severe, especially when authorities believed magic was being used to harm someone or challenge the state. So, in the provinces, some religious practices were not simply strange customs. They could become dangerous things to practice openly, and that changes the way we look at the dodecahedrons. If one of these objects was an ordinary tool, there would be little reason for its purpose to remain hidden. But if it belonged to a private ritual, perhaps involving divination, offerings, curses, or the dead, secrecy would make far more sense. There was another clue that pushed researchers in that direction. Some dodecahedrons have been recovered from graves, hoards, and other unusual deposits. That does not prove they were magical objects, but it makes the ritual interpretation much harder to ignore. Even the geometry invited questions. Centuries before Rome, Greek philosophers had already connected the shape with the cosmos. Plato famously associated the dodecahedron with the heavens. So imagine the object from the perspective of someone living in the Roman provinces. 12 faces, different sized openings, a hollow center, and a costly bronze object that could be carefully cast, used, and then deliberately buried. It may have been connected to a ritual we no longer understand, but there was still a serious problem. None of this proved what actually happened inside it. The theories were interesting, even disturbing, but theories were not enough. Researchers needed something physical, something the object itself could reveal. And when they finally started examining it closely, the clues they found began pointing toward a function far more chilling than any theory had ever suggested. But to understand that, we have to return to the 2023 investigation at Norton Disney, because that was where the strongest pieces of the puzzle finally came together. The disturbing function. The strangest thing about the Norton Disney dodecahedron wasn't what it looked like. It was what the evidence suggested someone had done with it. When researchers examined the material recovered from inside and around the object, the first clues seemed ordinary enough. There were traces consistent with stearic acid, a substance commonly found in animal fats. Then came pine resin, a material that could have been burned or heated to produce smoke and a strong scent. There were also traces of lavender oil and other aromatic material. At first, none of this could explain the object. But then researchers found something that changed the question completely: carbonized material. And suddenly, the flame theory looked very different. Researchers were no longer asking whether someone could have used the dodecahedron with a flame. They had traces suggesting that something had actually been burned inside it. But what? The next clue came from its chemical composition. Researchers detected calcium phosphate. Now, that substance can come from several sources, so by itself, it could not solve the mystery. But there was one source that immediately made the finding more important: bone. Bone contains large amounts of calcium phosphate, and much of that mineral can survive even after intense heat destroys the organic material. It was a disturbing connection. Still, calcium phosphate alone could not prove that the material was bone. And even if it was bone, it could have come from almost any living organism. It could have come from animal remains. It could have come from birds, or even from other material already present in the archaeological soil. So the real question became much harder. What exactly was this material? To answer that, researchers had to examine it in far greater detail. They studied the particles under a microscope, analyzed their elemental chemistry, carried out isotope testing, and compared the results with known archaeological bone. And when the results were finally put together, they pointed toward something far more horrifying. And in case you don't know, these are bones left behind after a body has been burned at extremely high temperatures during cremation. And that changed the meaning of everything they had found. The implication was not simply that the object had been buried near the dead. Something may have been burned inside it. But there is an important distinction here. Earlier, the lack of wax and oil residue made the ordinary candle holder theory difficult to defend. That did not mean combustion inside a dodecahedron was impossible. A candle burning repeatedly over months or years would leave a very different pattern from a short ritual in which a small amount of material was burned once. And that difference may explain why the earlier theories failed. The most disturbing possibility is that the dodecahedron was never designed to provide light at all. It may have been part of a ritual involving smoke, scent, burning materials, and the remains of the dead. And when we put all the clues together, they begin pointing toward one of the darkest practices associated with the ancient Celtic world, necromancy. In simple terms, it meant trying to communicate with the dead or gain knowledge from them. And the object wouldn't need to be some supernatural device for that ritual to take place. The ritual itself could have been entirely human. Burned material could create smoke. Resin and aromatic oils could fill the air with strong scents. Ash and bone could become part of the ceremony. And for the people performing the ritual, these physical elements may have been believed to create a connection between the living and the dead. So, in the end, even after 2,000 years, the Roman dodecahedron remains one of the most mysterious objects from the ancient world, with its true purpose still unconfirmed. But if the clues from the 2023 investigation were really pointing toward a ritual involving the dead, what were its creators hoping to discover? And why did the Romans, who may have witnessed such rituals themselves, leave not even a single clear explanation of this object in their records? Let me know what you think about this in the comments below. If you liked this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for more incredible videos like this. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.